Good day, class. Let's begin our discussion of Chapter 3, Consciousness and the Two-Track Mind. First, defining consciousness. When we look at the history of consciousness, we need to understand that in the late 1900s, psychology was viewed as the state of consciousness. In the 20th century, at least the first half of it, consciousness focus was often replaced by behaviorism. Again, a major movement in psychology, behaviorism, particularly in the Americas. After the 1960s, we saw consciousness begin to reappear, partly due to the fact of technology allowing us to take images of the brain as to what's going on inside of it. So now supported by neuroscience. The current definition of consciousness could be described as awareness of self and environment. It features and allows the assemblage of multiple information sources. It focuses attention when learning a complex concept or behavior, and it involves also different states. So consciousness is a subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. There are various states of consciousness. Some states occur spontaneously through dreaming, becoming very sleepy or drowsy, and also through daydreaming. Some are induced physiologically, hallucinations, orgasm, food or oxygen starvation, and some are psychologically induced, such as sensory deprivation, hypnosis, or meditation. All of these have some influence on our level of subjective awareness of ourselves and the environment around us. Now, cognitive neuroscience. This is an interdisciplinary study of brain activity linked with mental processes. So we see a bunch of other disciplines looking at what's going on in the brain at the time that they're doing certain types of mental processes. By doing this, they're trying to link these things together. Conscious experiences arise, per some, from synchronized activity across the brain. So, when asked to imagine playing tennis or navigating her home, a non-communicative patient's brain, identified on the top image there, exhibited activity similar to a healthy person's brain, indicated on the bottom. Researchers wonder if such an fMRI scan might enable a conversation with some unresponsive patients by instructing them, for example, to answer yes to a question by imagining playing tennis, top and bottom left, and answer no by imagining walking around their home, top and bottom right. So what we see is these different responses depending on what type of activity that they are imagining. So they're trying to find out numerous ways in which they can use this information that they have been able to discover during cognitive neuroscience to be able to, in this example, communicate with non-communicative patients. Now, something that we're all aware of, attention or selective attention. Selective attention is our conscious awareness focused on a particular stimulus. Focused on a particular stimulus. One example may be the cocktail party effect. You may have experienced this before. You're at a party. Music's playing, a lot of people are having conversations around you, and you're in the corner talking with somebody. As far as you are aware, you're totally involved in the conversation you're having with this individual. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you hear your name. Your name breaks through all the music, breaks through all the other conversation going on, and breaks through your conversation that you're having. And all of a sudden, you're able to pay attention. This is the cocktail party effect. We mentioned this previously. The idea that when we are filtering out all sorts of information, because we are picking it up at some level, but when something becomes relevant to you, well, we get this big red flashing light and it says pay attention to it. And so your name is one of those indicators. So when you hear your name in this particular scenario, you can pay attention to it. Even though previously you would not have been able to tell what was going on around you because you are engrossed in a conversation with someone and music's playing and other conversations are going on around you. So selective attention is something that is very powerful. We can pay attention to something, but oftentimes miss other things that are going on around us. So selective attention and accidents. Basically, when we talk about multitasking, that I can multitask or you think you can multitask, that's really not what's happening. What's actually happening is you are doing what is referred to as like toggling between activities. A rapid switching between activities degrade sustained focused attention. So what it comes down to, you move from one activity to another, and by doing so you lose some of the focus that you have. Okay, but the idea is that we're not truly multitasking. We're not truly doing two things at the same time. That doesn't occur. So a digital device uses while we're driving increases the risk of traffic accidents. We know now that you must use hands-free devices when you are on the phone while driving a vehicle, what we're supposed to. But the reality of it is that even having a conversation with a hands-free device will degrade your focus and your attention and increases the likelihood of traffic accidents. So a digital device use while driving increases the risk of traffic accidents. Talking with passengers also increases the risk. This could be talking to a passenger in your car, in the passenger seat of your car can also increase the risk of accidents. So a couple of other ideas about selective attention. We know sort of deep down that our resources are being taken away from us when we're listening to music while driving a car. Let's say you have a very important job interview and you find out as you're getting closer and closer to that interview time that you may be lost in this particular neighborhood. You're listening to the music at the moment, but now you realize that you need to pay attention or pay more attention to the street names. So normally what will happen is you'll turn off the radio or at least turn that music way, way down so that you can have more resources to focus your attention on the street names. So let's look at inattentional blindness. Failing to see visible objects when attention is directed elsewhere. There's this famous experiment that was done years ago, and the scenario was basically this. You had a bunch of students in a hallway, and they were tossing a ball back and forth between each other. They're sort of like in a circle, I believe, and they're like 6 of them, and they're tossing this ball back and forth. They had participants, the people who are taking part in the study, down the hallway looking at these people playing with this ball. And the people were supposed to count how many times the ball exchanged hands. Okay? And then they would be asked later how many times did the ball exchange hands, and they would report whatever number there was to report. But then the experimenters would ask them, what about the man in the gorilla suit? What the experimenters had done is while the subjects were counting the number of times the ball was being caught by the students down the hall, they had somebody dressed up in a gorilla suit walk behind those students, clearly visible. But the students who were the participants or subjects of the experiment, they were so intent and so focused on counting the number of balls, okay, that were how many times the ball was being caught by those students, that they failed to recognize or to note that there was a man in a gorilla suit walking behind those students. So that's inattentional blindness. We're blind because we're not paying attention. And then we have change blindness. Failing to notice changes in the environment is a form of an inattentional blindness. So what we can see in this example here, we have one individual, and sort of like in the brown coat, walk up to the individual in the red sweater. Okay, and that person asks the red sweater individual for directions, for example. Then, as the person is beginning to explain something, they have somebody distract them. So you have these workers taking this board and they separate them. And then what they do is they change the brown coated individual for a blue coated individual. And basically the red sweater individual tells the instructions to a totally different person. And when they do experiments like this, most times the individual who's providing the instructions doesn't notice that a change occurred at all. Change blindness. So attention is powerfully selective. Your conscious mind is in one place at a time. So the notion is that we cannot divide our mind up in multitask. We're doing one thing at a time. And because of that, sometimes information changes don't get registered, or sometimes we don't notice anything at all because we're so focused on one thing and are not open to the possibility of something else there. So let's look at one of the key reasons why we talk about the two-track mind, dual processing. Dual processing is simultaneous information processing on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. It can be done, but we're not usually going to be aware of a lot of this information. So let's talk about this other really interesting thing called blind sight. Responding to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it. Responding to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it. So let me sort of describe what this basically means. You can have an individual who is blind. They are technically blind, meaning, for example, that they no longer have the ability to process visual information so that they become consciously aware of what they are seeing. You ask them, you show them something technically in front of them, put something in front of them, their eyes are looking at it, you ask them what they're seeing, they cannot report to you what they see because they're not consciously aware of it. But, however, they may be unconsciously noting that information. So you can have somebody who is technically blind, they can't perceive any visual stimuli, put them in a hallway, and then put obstacles in front of them in that hallway, and then get them to start walking down that hallway. What you'll be able to see them do is to avoid all the obstacles in that hallway, even though they're not aware of anything that's in the hallway because they can't see it, they cannot perceive it. So what this is telling us is that we have a two-track mind. That at one level, our conscious level to which we are aware, we have no knowledge of anything in the hallway or anything around us visually because we are blind. We can't process that information in our occipital lobe. So we are blind, literally. But our equipment, our eyes and retina and all that other stuff that we use to see is still functioning. And we'll talk more about that in the upcoming chapter. But all that stuff is still functioning. But it's being processed at an unconscious level. So at an unconscious level, we are detecting that information, that stimuli in front of us, which will allow us, when we don't try to control ourselves, we just walk down that hallway, but for whatever reason we're not walking in a straight line, unconsciously we're sort of been driven to move around those obstacles. That's what we refer to as blind sight. Okay? Our actions, we have perception, but it's at an unconscious level. We're not consciously aware of it. Now, additionally, when it comes to dual processing, we have this other notion, something called parallel processing. Processing many aspects of a stimulus or a problem at once. Parallel processing, you've heard the term before when it comes to computers, a parallel processor. This is the idea of really truly multitasking, which again, we as humans consciously cannot do. So processing many aspects of a stimulus or a problem at once, parallel processing. as opposed to sequential processing. Sequential processing, processing one aspect of a stimulus or problem at a time. Usually this involves new information processing or difficult problem solving. Sometimes we can do things without really having to pay attention to them. We're doing some sort of mindless task, some sort of rote behavior, repetitive action, and we don't have to really think about it. But as soon as something changes, as soon as something unusual happens, new information is being presented to us, we then have to process that sequentially. Think about it this way. We talked about not paying attention sometimes. Have you ever been in a situation, let's say you've been at school or work all day, you go into the parking lot wherever your car is parked, you get in your car, you start it up, and then the next thing you recall that you're consciously aware of, you're in the driveway at your home. But you have no conscious recollection of driven the 40 minutes it took you to get there. That happens to me quite often sometimes. Well, the notion is a lot of that behavior, that rote behavior that you do, can be monotonous, and you can do it almost without really consciously thinking about it. We can only hope, though, that if something really unusual happened, okay, that all of a sudden that new information brings you back into the moment and you become more conscious aware of it, and you have to begin that sequential processing again. So the notion here is that we have a couple levels of our consciousness. We have the unconscious and we have the conscious. And sometimes we're not going to be aware of a lot of things that are going on. Now, our ability to process information, the parallel processing, as we'll see, can happen more when we are at an unconscious level. We can handle many things at once, unconsciously. But consciously, we do more sequential processing. So that gives us some really good background as to this notion of dual processing, or the two-track mind. So we've talked already about the various stages of consciousness with a little bit of an overview. We've talked about our attention, our selective attention, about how we can process things consciously or unconsciously, and about parallel versus sequential processing. Another major area in which we change our state of consciousness is in sleep. First, let's talk about this idea of biological rhythms. We operate on a 24-hour biological clock. Okay, we're tied to the 24-hour day. Okay, so we go up and down through various cycles during the day based on this 24-hour clock. We also see, when it comes to our biological rhythms, as we'll see shortly, that our sleep cycles happen in a very regular rhythm as well, in 90-minute sleep cycles. Okay, so when we go to sleep, we sleep in 90-minute cycles. Sometimes you may have noted you go to sleep at a certain time and then all of a sudden you wake up for some reason. You may have a note that maybe an hour and a half has elapsed, meaning that you've completed one sleep cycle. All right. Now, a circadian rhythm is this internal biological clock, and we have it. And some people, I have a friend that does this quite well. They always know basically what time of day it is. You can ask them what time it is, and they don't have a watch or a phone handy, and they'll say, I think it's around such and such time, and they're really, really close. Their rhythm, they're more aware of it, okay, and they can almost tell what time of day it is. Now, this internal biological clock can be altered by age and experience. All right. First of all, when it comes by age, one influence in general, we have night owls tend to be smart and creative. Younger people tend to be more of the night owls. That's when they're going to be at their brightest, so to speak, really hitting all cylinders. When you're a little bit older, we tend to be more morning types. They tend to do better in school, take more initiative, be more punctual, be less vulnerable to depression, and so on. But the idea is that it does change as we sort of age. So Younger folks, which most of you are, probably going to experience a lot more night owl type of tendencies, okay, because that's the way your rhythm sort of goes. As we get older, it does tend to change. So, what we see here, biological rhythms and sleep, they do a lot of research on sleeping behavior and things of that nature. And what they do is they'll put these diodes on your scalp and face, and then be able to track certain types of movements like your left eye, right eye, muscle tension, and then also when they place it on your scalp, they'll be able to track your brainwave patterns. And this is able to tell us quite a bit about what's going on inside of you, what state of consciousness you may be in. So let's look at biological rhythms and sleep. So sleep stages. About every 90 minutes, people cycle through distinct sleep stages. We have non-REM 1 sleep, slow breathing, and irregular brain waves. We have hallucinations and hypnagogic sensations can occur at this time. These are sort of false sensory experiences, such as seeing something in the absence of external visual stimuli. You may have hallucinations as you're falling into this stage of sleep. We have non-REM 2, relaxed more deeply, 20 minutes or so. That's when this usually occurs. Sleep spindles that aid memory processing. And then we go into deeper non-REM 3 or deep sleep, 30 minutes or so, where you have these slow delta waves. As you look to the right, we see each one of these brainwave patterns indicate a different state of consciousness or a different stage of sleep. So we have the waking brainwave beta waves at top, waking alpha waves. Then we see non-REM 1, followed by non-REM 2, and then non-REM 3. And at the very bottom, we have REM sleep. And what is REM? REM stands for rapid eye movement. And rapid eye movement, as we'll see, is usually going to be associated with dreaming. And we'll talk about that real soon. So, REM sleep. Rapid and sawtooth brain waves, okay, heat rate rise, rapid and irregular breathing, darting eyes, momentary activity bursts behind closed lids. We have usually some sort of active motor cortex messages blocked by the brainstem. Paradoxical sleep, that basically means that we are asleep, but the paradox is by looking at our brainwave pattern and some activities, it seems as if we are awake because there's lots of stuff going on in our brain. So what happened is this. I think around the 1950s or so, they started to note rapid eye movement, and they started to wake people up during this time when they were going through this rapid eye movement. And what they discovered is usually they would report that they were just dreaming. So REM, rapid eye movement sleep, is usually going to be associated with us dreaming. And we have these brainwave patterns that are more indicative of us being awake than asleep. That's why it's paradoxical sleep. Okay, but we are actually asleep and we are dreaming. A lot of mental activities going on there. Now, you may ask yourself, why is it that we do not hurt ourselves while we are dreaming? There is a reason behind that. Well, even though the brain may be sending all sorts of messages to the body to do this or to run from that clown that's chasing us in this dream slash nightmare, but we don't really move that much, okay? And the reason behind that is that we are suffering from, at this point while we are dreaming, a protective paralysis. The messages from the cortex are being blocked at the brainstem so that we don't act out our dreams. So it's sort of a protective mechanism, which makes perfect sense. We don't want to act out our dreams. It can be very, very dangerous. So the sleep cycle repeats itself about every 90 minutes for younger adults, with shorter, more frequent cycles for older adults. As the night wears on, deep N3 sleep grows shorter and disappears. The REM and N2 sleep periods get longer. So one of the things that we need to understand is while we're sleeping, there's lots of activities actually going on within us. Okay, and we'll see there's probably a few reasons why that may be. All right, what this little slide shows us real quickly is that we seem unaware of the moment we fall into sleep, but someone watching our brain waves could tell. And so we can see the lines here on the wave pattern, that they're smooth, and then all of a sudden, boom, they change. And that's when we have fallen into a state of sleep. Happens rather quickly, and we're usually not going to be really aware of it. We just fall into a different state of consciousness. Now let's look at a typical night's sleep. We're comparing here young adults versus older adults. The stages in typical night sleep. We see we start off at the upper left here. We start off awake. Then we go into N1 stage sleep. Then N2. Then N3. All right. And then we come back up. And before we start our next, we then hit a REM stage sleep. We're now dreaming. Then we go back down to go down again, and 2 and 3, back up, and then we dream again. And so what we see here is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 things that are happening here where we are having a dream. Rapid eye movement. Now, we may not have recollection of all these dreams when we wake up the next day. In fact, normally what will happen is you'll most likely have a better chance of remembering the last dream you had just before you woke up in the morning. All right, so young adults will have these 4 or 5 dreams a night. And you can see at the very top line here, we have awake. They were awake before they went to sleep, and then they may awake briefly 1 or 2 times during that night's 8-hour sleep cycles. Now let's look at the older adults. You can see the pattern of sleep is much different. First thing you probably will note is that there are more times that the older adults are awake. 2 times for young adults, but let's count real quickly here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We'll stop counting there. 13 plus times where they are at least awake briefly. All right. So sleep is not going to be as consistent there. There's going to be a lot more times where they wake up. You can also see too that their REM sleep seems to be shorter as well. So quality of sleep changes as we get older, and the idea, for a variety of reasons, one of the things could be just not as comfortable as you were when you were younger. You may have body parts that just ache or are not comfortable and wake up because of it, or go to the restroom. So the idea here is that these things do change or alter as we get older, but sleep does differ depending on whether you're young or older individual. Now, what affects our sleep patterns? We have genetic influences, cultural influences. All these things can influence a great deal as to how it is that we sleep. We see the effects of presence of or absence of light on the 24-hour biological clock is also important. There's a reason why it is that we want the lights turned down. We want to cover our eyes to go to sleep, because that aids in our sleep. All right, there are light-sensitive retinal proteins, and we have the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that decreases melatonin production. So the idea here is this: when we have light, we see a decrease in melatonin production. Melatonin is the thing that helps us to get asleep. So if we don't have melatonin in our system, we're less likely to get asleep. So we see that by turning the lights off and turning the lights down and things of that nature, covering our eyes, we increase melatonin production and we're more likely to fall asleep. So again, one of the problems that can influence our sleep greatly is that we have lights on all the time. There's lights on, light sources. We don't truly have to be in the dark anymore. And with all this constant electrical light around, it may cause problems with melatonin production and our inability to sleep. Chronic state of desynchronization among night shift workers. For example, your sleep patterns have gotten out of whack because you work at odd hours or are up too often for studying for exams or writing papers. Irregular sleep schedules. All of these can have a great deal of influence on our sleep patterns and can cause some issues. And as we'll see, sleep is a very, very important thing to our health. Now, why do we need sleep? Well, sleep functions for a variety of reasons for us. First of all, it serves as a protection. If you even think about it, sleep a long time ago was very, very protective of our ancient ancestors. Usually, we would sleep when? During the nighttime. And oftentimes, predators would have a lot more capability than we would as human beings during the night. We don't see that well at night. We cannot get around in the dark. If we don't have light sources like a flashlight or electric lights, and our ancient ancestors didn't. So it would be good for them to be taken out of the danger or harm's way at nighttime. So sleep function, this is a way to get us out of the way when we could be at our most vulnerable. Sleep also help us to recuperate. We recuperate from the day's activities to rest and get our energy levels back up. It also can help with restoration and rebuilding of fading day memories. So restoration and rebuilding of fading day memories. So when we get a good night's sleep, we're able to have better recollection and better recall and better memories. Again, we saw this in a previous chapter where we talked about the theoretical study, the study of sleep boosts memory. So yes, we see that again here. It also can help with creative thinking. Sometimes you're having a problem and you can't come up with a solution to the problem. You may get a good night's sleep on it, and that may help you come up with a solution to that particular problem the next day. So it can help feed your creative thinking. And then supporting growth. Oftentimes when we need to grow or repair ourselves, or grow if we're talking about a young person going through puberty, for example, oftentimes that will be occurring while we are sleeping. So as I was indicating earlier, or suggesting earlier, sleep is very important function, okay? And if we don't get enough sleep, it can cause some problems. Sleep loss. Sleep debt takes at least 2 weeks for recovery. All right, so if you fall behind in your sleep, it can take almost 2 weeks for you to recover that sleep debt you've incurred. In unrestricted sleep, people average anywhere from 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep after sleep debt is paid. High school, 28%, and college, 69% of students report feeling tired or being sleep deprived. So around 30% of high schoolers, around 70% of college students sleep deprived. So obviously, a lot of folks, particularly in college, do have some sleep issues. When you have sleep loss, it can have a variety of effects: conflicts in friendships, depression predictor, diminished productivity, and increased risk for accidents, weight gain, and physical health issues. So let's look at a couple of these things real quickly here. How sleep deprivation affects us. Decreased ability to focus attention and process and store memories. Increased risk of depression, decreased metabolic rate, increased cortisol, enhanced limbic brain responses to the mere sight of food, decreased cortical responses, reducing the ability to resist temptation. Let me cut it to the chase here. We can see all the other items here. They're usually all very, very bad. But one of the key things here is that when we don't get enough sleep, a few things do happen. Okay, we usually will gain some weight. We usually are more likely to catch a cold or some flu symptoms because we can't fight it off that well. But the reality of it is, imagine when you're up at night, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, how often is it that you go get a midnight or early morning snack? Okay, so the idea here, all this stuff sort of feeds in together and can cause some major issues when it comes to our health. So sleep oftentimes can be at the root of some major issues with individuals' health. Oftentimes a doctor may always tell you to get enough sleep. If you're recovering from surgery, get enough sleep. If you're recovering from the flu, get enough sleep. All these things are pointing to the importance of getting proper sleep and having good sleep hygiene. All right, let's talk about some major sleep disorders, and then we'll go to a break at that point. All right, so sleep deprivation and sleep disorders. Some major sleep disorders. We have insomnia. One of the things that we see most oftentimes if someone has a sleep disorder will probably be insomnia. Recurring problems in falling or staying asleep. So these individuals have a problem getting to sleep or staying asleep. We have narcolepsy. Sudden, uncontrollable sleep attacks with sufferer sometimes lapsing directly into REM sleep. These are the individuals who may be doing a normal day activity and all of a sudden they fall into REM sleep. They just go to sleep or fall into a dream. We have sleep apnea, where someone can stop breathing while asleep, and repeated momentary awakenings associated with obesity, especially in overweight men. With sleep apnea, you literally stop breathing at night. You need to understand that this is particularly dangerous. Breathing is very important to our survival. First of all, if you're not getting enough oxygen, it can cause damage to the brain. So sleep apnea, even though we may not think of it as being very dangerous, it can be. We also have night terrors, high arousal and the appearance of being terrified. Target children during their first few hours of REM-3 sleep. Now, note what we're talking about here, REM-3 sleep, for night terrors as well as for sleepwalking and sleep talking. Again, night terrors, sleepwalking, and sleep talking mostly occur in childhood and occur during non-REM-3 sleep, and they tend to diminish with age. But these are non-REM disorders. That means non-REM, non-rapid eye movement disorders. The key point behind that is this: they almost have to be. The reason is that when we are in rapid eye movement, recall, we're going to be paralyzed. When we are actually dreaming, having rapid eye movement, we cannot move. Our movement is being very much tapped down because there's a block at our brainstem. So we may be sending cortical messages to the body, but they never get there because we have this block at the brainstem from those messages while we are dreaming, because it can be very, very dangerous for us to be acting out our dreams. So that is sort of a protective mechanism. When we get back for the next section, we'll start talking a little bit more about why it is that we dream.